Onassis Foundation.
Dublab.
Welcome to the Quarantine Tapes, a daily podcast from Onassis LA and dublab. Hosted by Paul Holdengräber, this series chronicles shifting paradigms in the era of social distancing.
Hello,
Hello, could I please speak with Saul Williams?
this is he.
Saul, this is Paul Holdengräber calling you. Thank you so much for taking this call, for being part of the first week of the Quarantine Tapes. I'm really delighted.
It's a pleasure, Paul. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, and I want to start, if I could, with a line that I think matters to you greatly, and I'd love you to unpack it for us. It's a line, I'm glad that makes you laugh, or at least smile. You say when Fela Kuti said that music is a weapon of the future, we're aware of what we're building. The weapon of the future. What do you think he meant, and what does it mean more importantly for you?
Well, music travels without a passport. You know, it has the ability to touch people even in ways and places that may be hidden to themselves. So not only does it travel across borders without a passport, but it also can travel within each and every one of us who have the opportunity to listen and to seek out ourselves or just moments of enjoyment or relaxation through music. It affects us, and it has an effect. And as an artist, and as a musician, I believe strongly in the power of music to connect, to harmonize, to illuminate and highlight, instances and emotion in spiritual and psychological depth, and even in inebriation and losing ourselves, and finding ourselves through it. It carries an algorithm that supersedes many algorithms in its ability to reach and connect us. It's something that we oftentimes have very little problem agreeing on, although we may not agree on the particularities of who our favorite artist is or how we're touched by something or whether we believe something when we hear it or not. But there are certain musicians and certain ways in which music is undeniable, and even in transcending generations, and even in transcending like lyrical messages. Sometimes it's just the feeling, the vibe, the wave. It carries something of import, and I think that Fela is also speaking to the fact that it carries something that can charge us, that can invigorate us, and remind us of ourselves and of our power and the power of democracy and of our voices and of speaking up and marching. Like it's the role that music has always played in connection to protest is undeniable. In the same way that it's always played a role in relation to work and group labor, what have you. It motivates and energizes. And when used strategically, I think it can also be used to at least explore the destruction of a prevailing system.
You used the word democracy, and Fela talks about it projecting into the future. And
Yes.
the combination of both of these thoughts seem to me tremendously important. You have just come back, as I understand it, from Rwanda, and I'm wondering. Well, first of all, you might tell our listeners what you were doing there, and also this virus, which is now really global. And I've never lived
Yes.
anything in my lifetime that has been global. I've lived tragedies, and I've lived like anybody who's over 30 years old now. We've had conflicts that we know are pretty damning, but this is of a different nature. And I'm wondering if you can bring us news from Rwanda, perhaps first news of what you were doing there, and then news on how this virus is being lived there.
Sure. Well, I had been in Rwanda since early November. I was there to direct my first feature, Neptune Frost. We had an entire Rwandan and Burundian cast and crew. And it was a pretty big production for an independent film, particularly for a country that I guess made its first forays into the cinematic universe as late as like 2004. So the cinema industry is new in Rwanda, and so even in being able to acquire film gear and camera gear and lights and what have you, things would either have to be imported or constructed, and we opted to construct our dolly there, to construct cinema lighting. We found a LED factory there and brought in some ideas about what we could construct. We found engineers that we worked with because we wanted to be able to leave something behind for other filmmakers, other Rwandan filmmakers who are up and coming, to have materials to work with, because for most films that have been done there recently, everything that's either come in from Europe or Kenya, or something like that, or South Africa, but there's no cinema industry there. There's no cinema rental industry there, which is what we operate with, in the States, in Canada, when we're making films. We usually rent that equipment. So yeah, we wrapped Neptune Frost on March 3rd. That film it's a sci-fi musical, and it was an adventure of an experience.
It sounds like a sci-fi musical.
Oh my goodness! I mean, I've been working.
I can't wait.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Is Octavia Butler in the background anywhere?
Octavia Butler is always in the background, right, particularly in the background of this pandemic.
I know.
And it's very parable of the sower, like
goodness me,
feeling that I have in my gut, surrounding being in California right now and being in lockdown.
I think she set it in 2025, so we're very close.
Yep, we are very close. So that's what I was doing there. So we wrapped on the 3rd. On the 7th, I had an invitation to a premiere in Kigali, that's the capital of Rwanda, for a film that's just come out called Petit Pays, Little Country, written by a rapper turned writer named Gaël Faye, about his experience in Bujumbura in Burundi during the genocide of 1994 and what have you. The experience of him and his family, and his book won the Goncourt, I think in 2016, and it's been turned into a film. So we went to the premiere, and that was our first time out of the house after wrapping the film. And when we got to the premiere, there were people in lab coats there with little machines that looked like little white plastic guns that they pointed at our heads, saying, "We need to take your temperature." They were wearing masks and gloves, and in order to enter the theater, they had to take everybody's temperature and ask questions in relation to the virus. So that's on March 7th in Kigali. So that's when we were first like, holy crap, what is happening? I mean, we were aware of what was happening in the news and what have you, but to encounter that when you leave the house, dressed up for a premiere, it was startling, to say the least. So it's been 8 days since I've gotten back to the States. And so what I can tell you is that one, the day before I left, I had to do some final like banking and what have you in Kigali. And I remember going to the bank and everyone in the bank was wearing masks and gloves. And I remember thinking like it's a bank of surgeons. Like it was so strange. it was so strange. And then we were like, shoot, we heard about the shortages here. And so our final stop before we left Kigali was actually to pharmacies there to get gloves and masks for our plane ride. And so we did that and hopped on the plane. Well, not so easy. One, entering the airport in Kigali, once again, we had our temperatures taken, a series of questions asked and what have you. Then we were able to get through security. That was the first layer of security before, being allowed on the plane. When we changed planes in Istanbul, they were waiting for us as we exited the plane once again to take our temperatures and ask us questions, whether we had been exposed to people, blah, 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 blah. Because we had been in Rwanda since November, we were pretty much in a zone that hadn't been affected too much. At that time, I think there was only one case in Rwanda. Now there are 40. And so from Istanbul, we flew to LA. And when we landed in LA, no one took our temperature. We did have a few questions asked, that pretty much bottlenecked our exiting of the plane. But we were amazed at how little we had to do entering the U.S. versus how much we had done before we got here. And so that's my first point of observation, was that the immediate response of countries like Rwanda and Turkey seemed to have doctors in preparation mode at the airport, like, yo, what's up? How are you feeling? What's your temperature? And all this stuff. And when we got to California just last Tuesday, it was not the case.
You've spent a lot of time traveling the world and placing and displacing your family in different parts of the world so that they can experience the world from afar, looking perhaps at the U.S. From the perspective of being, let us say, in Paris. And I'm wondering if you think that this virus will further insulate the world, will make us maybe less connected. Yesterday I had the pleasure of speaking with Pico Iyer, and he once said that when Graham Greene was asked near the end of his life why he traveled, Greene simply responded by saying, ambiguity.
I would hope, and so now, of course, I'm saying hope. So, of course, there's no certainty in my response, but this is truly a global pandemic, which is what makes the disingenuous sort of response of our president here and of the right and wanting to hurry up and get back to work when the entire world is on pause, when the entire world is taking this seriously. Like before we left Rwanda, school had been canceled. All group gatherings by more than 10 people had been restricted. Church had been restricted. All of this stuff happened before we left in Rwanda. And now, of course, they restricted groups higher than 2 together there. And all, they're on complete lockdown just as we are here. As they are in the UK, as they are, in so many countries around the world. Which is to say that the world is taking this seriously, and it's understandable why it is and why it should be that way. Forgive me, I'm hearing a truck outside. I think
it's okay. This is what Proust spoke about, the poetry of the phone call. I get to live in your environment for a moment.
You do,
so
just for a moment.
That's a good thing. we're finding new forms of conviviality. The phone, it's so interesting, isn't it? It used to be so exotic, and now we want to hear, the grain of the voice. We want to hear other people speak.
It means something.
Yeah, it means something. We can't touch each other, but we still need to be in contact. You were saying that you were hopeful. You were hopeful that
that in terms of our connection, will it make us more insular? Well, the United States has a special relationship to itself. Part of the reason
this usually in psychoanalytical terms, it has a name, right? It's a kind of a form of heightened narcissism.
It is.
Okay.
It is, and of course that idea is propagated by those who would essentially dumb down the populace and profit from that process. And so we're told that we're the greatest and we're the best and that we have the best. And a pandemic like this kind of illuminates the fact that there are other places that are better prepared, that have, greater concern for their citizenry, that think more in terms of, safety and health, on a regular basis and not just corporations. It's a crazy time. So we are empowered by looking out of this country,
right,
and applying it to what we see here. We are empowered by that as Americans here. We are extremely empowered by that outward gaze, because then we can, gain some clarity on what we're being told and what we're experiencing versus what we learn of other experiences in other places with other GDPs and other priorities in terms of leadership, right? So that's crucial. And yes, I've chosen to, make sure that my children and family, have, it's not simply a choice, it's a reality. My wife is not born in the U.S. We met in Paris. We have a relationship to the globe that's inherent in our relationship. But on top of that, I know personally, I was informed very much so by the fact that I was an exchange student when I was 16, living in Brazil for a year that when I arrived, school was on strike. So I didn't go to school that year that I was an exchange student. School was on strike. And on top of that, I was told that I would be going to night school because anybody 16 and over would be expected to work in the fields during the day. And so as a young hip-hop head coming from New York, arriving in Brazil, and being told night school because you're supposed to work in the fields during the day, I was like, what? It definitely opened my eyes to the fact that we weren't all operating in the same way globally. And it's the first time that I started looking at the distinctions to be made between the way some of us experience the world versus how others experience the world. And from then on, I decided to just keep it moving and to as you said, to heighten that ambiguity, to find a way to see and understand as much as possible, to witness as much as possible. I remember being in conversation a year or so ago with someone from Vietnam, and somehow the what we referred to as the Vietnam War came up, and I saw this look of confusion on their face. They were like, "What are you talking about? Do you mean the American War?" and I learned that in Vietnam, of course, they don't refer to it as the Vietnam War; they refer to it as the American War. But we grow up hearing.
You mentioned keeping things moving and moving also as you did to France. And of course, the name that comes up in my mind immediately in that context is James Baldwin, who in an essay called The Discovery of What It Means to Be an American wrote, "Once I was able to accept my role as distinguished, I must say, from my place in the extraordinary drama which is America, I was released from the illusion that I hated America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a loaded statement, and James Baldwin is someone that we all admire and look up to. He moved to Paris when he was 24 years old, from Harlem, and immediately, his outlook on the world and on the idea and reality of blackness and being African American versus being African or Northern African or Arab in Paris, which has its distinctions. There's a lot to see, a lot to understand, and yes, there are many things to admire. In relation to, when I say that, I think of the African American experience, I think of the indigenous experience, I think of the art forms and critical forms that were born here as a result of white supremacy, as a result of the colonial and imperialistic charm of those who hold the reins held. There's definitely a lot to acknowledge. I remember my first time on the continent of Africa in 1994 when my mother was an exchange teacher when I was in college, and she was teaching in the Gambia for a year, and my graduation gift was to go spend her final month on the continent with her from college. And so I flew to Senegal and then to the Gambia, and we traveled together throughout Senegal, the Gambia, and Mali. And one of the interesting things was that, I remember at that time, we had already gone from being colored and Afro-American and black to African-American. That was the popular term then. And then suddenly I'm spending time on the continent. And one of the thoughts that came to mind was, is it fair to say that I'm African American, or am I more American African? Just a slight distinction was there were.
We're seeing the shock doctrine in action in so many ways, and I'm wondering. How can artists, whether they be poet, musicians, writers, filmmakers, use such a shock doctrine in a positive way to raise collective consciousness?
There's a layer to your question that I do not completely accept.
Good.
Because I would say I think it's important for them to use it in a useful way. And I would not tie useful to positive, because I think of electricity and current and the role of the positive, the negative, and the neutral.
Quite right.
And so
I stand corrected. let me stand. I'm going to stand up just for a second. Okay, I'm sitting down again.
Okay, but you stood correct.
I stood.
No, I think that it has to be useful.
Yeah,
it has to be useful.
What do you mean by that?
And so useful can be many things, and can come about in many ways. And so when I think of Nina Simone talking about an artist speaking to the times, an artist speaking to their time. I think that there is nothing but that to do, but to utilize this, as you put it, this shock doctrine, this thing that's been illuminated through what we're all experiencing here together, and to make sense of it, and to help us make sense of it, and to help us utilize it to make sense of what we elect. And what we put in control, and who we put in control, and how we process information, and all of these things. Art, it can be used to facilitate, the digestive process, like papaya enzymes. It can be used for that, and meaning that it can help us make sense of something. And I think we need help sometimes making sense or connecting dots, connecting worlds, connecting ideologies, connecting what we felt but didn't know how to articulate with what we're witnessing and hearing articulated, especially when there's a distinction to be made between the two. Art is there for that and can be there for that. I'm someone who is excited about the role of art being utilized as something greater than simply for escape.
Simply for entertainment.
Yeah. Especially when I'm entertained by things other than escape.
Right.
I'm entertained by people speaking truth to power. Like I'm moved and motivated by it. I'm like, yeah,
it's exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's
exciting, and for people to articulate what is difficult.
Yes, and it's more than exciting. It's necessary. It's necessary for people to be called out to their faces at times. It's necessary to utilize the public space in unexpected ways to call things to attention and to call and point things out. It's necessary, and at times I think it's the highest art, or can correlate with the highest art. And so it's so when you ask me how can artists do that, my simple response is pay attention.
Yeah,
pay attention.
Just
pay attention, not only to the outside, but to what you're feeling, and interrogate yourself in the moment.
I think what Arthur Miller said so briefly remains so true, which is attention must be paid. Or, Simone Weil's wonderful comment where she said that attention is a form of prayer.
Yes.
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 Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Saul, can you leave us with some of your spoken word? I was thinking in particular The Virus, which I just recently read and which is extraordinary. I wouldn't want to read it, and I wouldn't want to recite it. I would want you to do that for us.
Right.
If you would.
So, yeah, I don't mind at all. You're referencing a song that I recorded with a beautiful group out of Canada called A Tribe Called Red. And they make magnificent electronic music. They are, of course, First Nation electronic musicians, and we collaborated on an album of theirs called Hallucination, and on a song called The Virus. And that song begins with me saying, the virus took on many shapes: the bear, the elk, the antelope, the elephant, the deer, the mineral, the iron, the copper, the coltan, the rubber, the coffee, the cotton, the sugar, the people. The germ traveled faster than the bullet. And I leave it at that.
Well, the last line, of course, is tremendous in the context we're speaking in now, the predicament we find ourselves. Saul, I can't thank you enough. It's such a such a pleasure to speak to you, and given that we both now, for the moment, live in the city, when we can get together, let's do that. Maybe let's take a walk 6 feet apart.
That would be wonderful. And good morning to everyone listening, and I hope everyone has safe days indoors. I think this is something we should take seriously, and use this moment graciously to reset and reboot our priorities. So, love to you and to everyone listening. Thank you.
Saul, thank you so much. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To support this show and Dublab's progressive programming, go to dublab.com/support.